What is the science behind early reading, and does early literacy actually hurt my child?
Even if I'm falling down, I will keep on searching for my highs.
Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Cassandra Shields. If you're new to seeing my face, I'm a mompreneur, a homeschooling mom, and a dedicated private teacher. This is a relatively new YouTube channel. I'm trying to start to get serious on here, but in the coming weeks and the months, I plan on sharing my experiences with my own kiddos as well as my students, insights that I have, and tips to help you navigate the journey of motherhood, homeschooling, and if interested in going this route in the future, even running your own online business. That way, moms kind of need a hustle too. In this video, we're going to talk about early literacy and if teaching kids to read before they start school in first grade is actually harming them in the future. I have three major parts that I'm covering in today's video. Number one is the claim that early literacy causes ADHD. Number two, traditional learning methods and why those usually don't work for young kids. And then finally, number three, the neurological and developmental processes of a child as they grow through their toddler years and going into elementary school, how everything upstairs kind of changes and develops when they get older. Make sure to stay to the end of the video to find out how you can work with me and how your child can learn to read even before they start school, or how your child can get caught up to their current reading level or their current grade level, even if they're behind right now. I've been a remote teacher for 6 years now and running my own company for just over 3 of them. I teach all core curriculum in my company and work with parents on how to homeschool their kiddos. Anyway, all that said, I always start with reading. If there is one thing parents and schools need to focus on and to make sure each child knows, it is reading and being able to read independently and on level. Now, when I say independently, I mean that they're able to sound out a word, put the word together, and understand what it says, hopefully without having someone tell them. And then as they get better and better at reading, be able to break that word back apart, decode the meaning of the word using the prefix, the root word or the base word, and the suffix, and then to use context to understand it. That is what I mean by reading independently. I want kids to be able to learn through text and not just be able to regurgitate it. And if we're being honest, being able to read makes all other academic subjects so much easier. Getting into the topic of today's video, I spent the past year or so getting more and more serious about showing up online and growing my audience through social networking such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and now YouTube. In doing this, I get a decent amount of parents commenting really negative stuff on my posts, and it's always the same kind of comments. It's stuff like, stop pushing reading. Let kids be kids. Early reading is actually harming them. Studies show, and then they proceed to fill in, some sort of terrible result. And I've asked, what are these studies? And usually people don't send them to me, but one woman did send me a BuzzFeed article, which is not a scientific study. I want to be clear there. BuzzFeed is just an article. Anyone can write anything on the internet. So let's talk about the actual science behind it today as well. Anyway, so I've had parents get so mad that I work with kids who were just 3, 4, and 5 years old, and they say that, my tutoring company needs to be shut down because early reading ruins children's eyesight and early reading even causes ADHD. So I've heard that last sentence, it causes ADHD, probably about 20 times now, and decided that I just need to formally address this because this is apparently a common belief among parents. This brings me to my first and major point of today's video. Does early literacy cause ADHD? Is that a thing? And I think that's something that we really need to discuss because it's something that people are actually very, very mad at me about. So I want to be super clear that I take these comments that people send me super seriously, and I actually spend hours trying to find the claims from actual and properly done peer-reviewed scientific psychological studies. Okay, so these are wild and outlandish claims that are blatantly false. So I just want to start there. There's no truth that we can cause ADHD at all. We'll get into that in just a minute, but let's unpack that. Okay, if a child is learning how to read and all of a sudden starts showing signs and symptoms of ADHD, there is something else going on. ADHD is thought to be genetic, therefore it usually doesn't just pop up. Seeing ADHD symptoms pop up spontaneously would be what we call a spurious variable in the name of research and science. So a little bit on that. A spurious variable is when one thing does not inherently cause another thing to happen, but it may appear that it does. An example of a spurious variable at play is the claim that ice cream sales go up in the summer, and so do instances of drowning. Therefore, ice cream causes drowning, which obviously you guys watching this video, you know that that's not true. That's not the case. But the ice cream here is a spurious variable, and just because the two are correlated does not make them related or causative. Okay, so we need to use some critical thinking skills when we are saying one thing causes something else. Does that mean that we should investigate it? Absolutely. And that's kind of what I want to talk about here today. So back to our wild claim. Okay, early reading causes ADHD. No, it does not. However, okay, let's talk about it. ADHD symptoms are very similar and actually almost identical to PTSD symptoms. So what does that mean? That means if we stress kids out enough via schooling, reading, or academics in general, they're going to turn into these really aversive times and these really aversive experiences that kids have, and thus create a trauma response. Where does this stress come from? In my experience as a teacher, the stress a lot of times is internal, meaning that these kids, they're aware that they're not doing a good job, they're comparing themselves to their peers, and then therefore they have a crap time at doing homework or independent reading. However, the stress can also come from external stressors like parents yelling at them for poor grades or calling them lazy, or even worse names. I see a lot of parents get very, very, very frustrated when trying to work with their kids at home. Teaching is not an innate skill, so if you struggle with that, that's okay. Lots of people do. But if this is something that you notice with your child, it likely is not ADHD, especially if it just popped up in 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grade. It's actually probably a stress response, which makes a lot more sense in this situation. If a parent, teacher, or even the child put enough stress on learning to read and it becomes this high pressure and stressful environment, then yeah, the child's going to display obvious signs of stress and then go into a fight, flight, or freeze response. Fight or flight mimic ADHD symptoms, especially in boys. We've categorized boys to fight or flight responses. Oh, that's ADHD symptoms. And then freeze mimics ADHD symptoms for girls and how we categorize them. For little boys, a fight response can look like tantrums, yelling, throwing stuff, hitting, throwing their homework, destroying books. If we're talking about a flight response, that looks more like avoidance and distraction. So you could be sitting there trying to help your kiddo with homework and they're, oh, mommy, did you know? Right? We've all been there. And then freeze responses are usually attributed more to little girls. This is like daydreaming or hanging out in La La Land, just kind of not paying attention and not just really showing that anyone's home. So we've attributed these behavioral symptoms to ADHD for years, and we have even categorized them into specific sexes. Boys will display ADHD symptoms like this and girls like this, but I want you to keep in mind that ADHD is just that. It is behavioral. There is not an instance where a doctor can show you where the ADHD is. If we're able to check off enough boxes, then we assume a child has ADHD, when we shouldn't say that they have ADHD. We should be saying they are portraying ADHD symptoms because we can't prove that they have the gene or that they don't. Most kids and even adults are not actually properly and formally diagnosed either, which is something that is constantly swept under the rug. A proper diagnosis actually takes hours and hours of testing, and you will usually pay at least a couple $100s out of pocket for that testing. So keep in mind that if your school calls you and they want to do assessments or whatever these tests are, schools can do preliminary assessments, but no, your child's school cannot actually formally diagnose them with anything. All right, that is going to cost out of pocket, and they're not going to pull your kid for several hours out of school to do this kind of testing for free. Just public schools don't have those resources. So does your child have ADHD? No, not necessarily. This is much more likely to be PTSD or just a trauma response. And they're not the same, but behavioral symptoms will present as the same. So are parents claiming that early reading causes ADHD correct? No, absolutely not. They're not correct in the slightest. But I do fully understand where they're coming from, which brings me into my second point for today's video. Let's talk about traditional learning methods and why those usually don't work for young kids. We're literally fighting against basic child development here. We are so ingrained in traditional schooling methods of sit down, shut up, listen to your teacher, and then using punishment when they don't perform the way that we want. If they don't have those tests, if they don't have those grades, they get punished. Now, I'm not a traditional teacher. I never actually have been. I never will be. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I would rather eat both of my own thumbs than ever work for a district, ever, anywhere. And I don't agree with most of the practices that they put forth. We have the science. We've had the science for years that the way that we implement school structures is not how kids learn. And we're basically setting them up to fail. Okay, so we know that kids aren't able or meant to sit down and sit still for 7 hours. In terms of focus, the rule of thumb is to take your child's age and then add 5 to that to find the amount of time that they're able to focus on one single task. So for example, if you have a 5-year-old, you're going to take their age 5 plus 5. That is their focus or their attention level. They're able to focus for about 10 minutes on one single task, and then you're going to have to switch it up or take a break. We also know that reading in and of itself is not an inherent skill. Reading is a written code that must be taught. I've heard many parents say, well, they're going to catch on eventually, right? Do they really need tutoring? Like, they're going to get it. Eventually it's going to click. No, not necessarily. And if they're actively learning how to read, then yes, it's going to get easier and they're going to get better at it. But are they just going to pick it up from looking at books without being explicitly taught? Or are they going to learn how to read because you read stories to them every night? No, they're not. And in the same way that if they're behind in school, they're not going to just catch up to their grade level without implementing something different and actually making sure that they learn the foundations of reading. A major problem is that schools are not teaching those foundations anymore. I'm part of so many Facebook groups, and some of the questions that teachers who have been claiming to teach for 20, 30, 40 years are saying that they're using in schools, or the questions that they're asking other teachers are kind of ridiculous, because I don't understand how they don't know the answer to that if they've been working with kids as long as they have been. A lot of the stuff that districts are using is outdated. We know that they don't work, but for whatever reason, the districts aren't updating their curriculum. And even if we have a teacher who, like me, they know exactly what they're doing, they're bound by a contract to implement what the district tells them to, not necessarily what the science tells them to do. They don't have that kind of autonomy in a public school, even if you have the best teacher in there. A lot of my kids come to me about second grade, usually the middle of second grade, and a lot of times even just by the second quarter of second grade, they're anywhere from 6 to 12 months behind where they should be given the grade that they're in. Now, granted, I live in the United States, so I have no idea how schools perform outside of this country. And I also want to give a little disclaimer here that my issues are not with the teachers. It's not with the individual teachers. Most of my friends and my peers in this industry are teachers, whether they're private like me or they're public and in the sector and they're going to a brick and mortar school every single day. I see what teachers do and what they've gone through, and I respect the bejesus out of them for sticking to it as long as they have. My issues are solely with the districts when it comes to talking about public school. Okay, so anyways, that being said, all of my content, what I make, my programs and my curriculum for my kids is all play-based. It is fun, it is easygoing, and I teach kids to read accurately and easily with as little as 2 to 5 30-minute lessons per week with me. All right, it doesn't have to be this overbearing big program where we drill it into them. We keep it fun, we keep it light, and that's really all that they need to be able to actually learn the foundations. I also teach the parents how to help their kiddos as well using actual methods, and then the science of reading and positive reinforcement at home. That way you have a semblance of an idea of what to do at home even when they're not in front of me on Zoom. When it comes to education, I have a decent amount of background in ABA or applied behavior analysis and child development. So I use all of that to help me create my programs and carry out the teaching effectively so that my students are actually able to learn without it being stressful for them. This then brings me to my third and final point of the video, the neurological and developmental processes of a child as they grow through their toddler years and into elementary school, essentially how their little baby brains work and how they grow so stinking fast. So first of all, we know that a child's brain has twice as many synaptic pathways as an adult's brain does. These pathways are essentially responsible for learning and making sense of the billions of stimuli all around us. But when those pathways are not used, they literally die off and there is no way to regrow them. So yes, it is easier to teach a toddler to read than it is for me to teach a 10-year-old, a teenager, or an adult from the beginning. I also studied language acquisition learning for the 3 years I worked with ESL or English as a second language students. And this is a developmental reason that professionals stress teaching second and third languages to babies and toddlers rather than waiting for them to grow up so they can learn the language via bookwork and flashcards and, how we learned in high school or college if you took a foreign language class. Second of all, when it comes to teaching reading, we actually see that early intervention and early literacy practices set kids up to be better off in the future than if they were to start reading around 6 or 7 years old. This has been redone in research actually over and over again, measuring kids and their abilities specific to reading. So their reading abilities in preschool or kindergarten, and then following that same cohort of kids longitudinally as they go through elementary school, middle school, and then high school. The results are positively correlated. That just means that they move in the same direction, that early literacy and high academic success are positively correlated, both moving up together. In other words, the better they're able to read as a toddler or a very young child, the higher their academic successes are as young adults. I pulled, I think, 4 longitudinal studies and they all showed the same thing, okay? I've also seen this hundreds of times over in the past 6 years of working specifically with kids anywhere from 2 to 8 years old. I haven't followed the same cohort through high school yet, but when I have kids 2 to 8 to 10 years old, and this is even across different countries and with language barriers, in my experience, it is so much easier to teach a 3-year-old how to read from stage 1 than it is to get a 9-year-old to read from stage 1. And I will tell you why. Usually, if I'm working with a 2nd or 3rd grader who is struggling with reading, there are bad habits I need to help them break. There are certain concepts that they need to unlearn. And then we have to address the confidence issues and the already made decision of, I don't like reading, I don't like school, or I'm stupid. Those confidence issues start as early as 1st grade, and those are really hard to overcome because we want kids to, how do I say it? It's not enough for you as the parent or even me as the teacher to be like, you're doing great, you're smart, you're awesome. Your child has to actually believe that. So that has to come from a type of intrinsic motivation, not just external. Obviously, you supporting them is going to be extremely helpful, but they need to believe it too. So when we have to undo a lot of these confidence issues, it can take a lot more time to get them from here to here because they just don't believe that they can do it. I will also say that in the studies that I poured over to prove my point for this video, and yes, I cited studies in the description box below, so you can also find and read them just in case, I'm just some random on YouTube. You can actually find them and you can read them yourself, what all of these other people did before me. But there was also one other major factor in both early literacy and academic success through high school. And the major predictor, and even a couple of the studies even stated as the main predictor, is actually parent involvement. Across the board, having a parent be as involved in their child's studies as possible sets their child apart from other children that don't have that support at home. So I want to be super clear here. Support is not pushing your child and drilling it into them until they perform. That's not support. All right. Support is just that. It is supporting them. It is being involved. It is helping them through these. And sometimes that help comes from a tutor. If you're not able to do it as the parent and you're struggling to not be frustrated, sometimes that help is having a third party come in who's not emotionally charged in the situation. I have 4 kids. I know how frustrating kids can be, so I'm not sitting here being like, oh, you just need to, no. Being a parent is hard, right? And you're going to be the safe space for your child, so when they want to or need to have a stress response, whether that's fight, flight, or freeze, you're going to be the person that they feel comfortable doing that in front of, where I'm probably not. I'm going to be the fun teacher coming in from the side, and they don't kind of have that relationship with me where they feel comfortable to show any sort of negative behaviors or emotions. Does that make sense? So then if we have this research, right, why do we have so many people who have such a problem with teaching kids to read, especially reading early? Now, to me, that is a super simple answer because we all grew up with the traditional schooling methods. We went to school 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, and we were told to sit down, shut up, stop passing notes, listen to your teacher, be perfect, and then that grades were everything. When I was younger, grades were extremely important, right? But if you didn't do well on a test, then you lost privileges. Also, can you redo that test for a higher score because it was hard or you didn't get it? Also, no, right? It was all about testing and scoring and never about actually learning the material. And we never had the autonomy to even learn what we wanted, even on a minute scale. Yes, there are things that we do need to know whether we really want to know about them or not, right? Finance, history is a major example. I mean, as long as history is taught truthfully and accurately, that's something that you can argue that everybody needs to learn. But for every single subject, we were always told that we had to follow this structure and a flow that was a lot of times boring and uninteresting, and then we had to spend hours memorizing it. That is not effective learning to me. Should it be organized? Absolutely. Should it have a flow? Yes. Should it be dry and boring and you just have to work on rote memorization? Absolutely not. That's a terrible way to learn, especially long term. So when parents see my ads or my social media accounts, I know that they assume that I'm offering a sit down, shut up course where parents force their kids to get on Zoom and then learn to read instead of taking that extra time to play with them and to just let them play and enjoy their day, right? We're forcing something else down their throat that they might not be interested in. Essentially, to shove academic material down their throat until they can perform in the way that we want them to. Read this book, show me you can read it. Take a test, can you understand this? What happened in da-da-da? And it's so much more than that. Usually my homeschooling families that work with me, they're a lot more open to meeting with me for the first time since they have a decent idea on what private looks like versus public. But my public school parents are decently reserved and doubtful that I can pull through for their child and actually bank on my guarantees. That ideology couldn't be further from the truth. Okay, so even my own children asked to join my online classes because all of my curriculum is stemmed in play-based learning. We use our tablets, we play games, we talk about our pets, and we talk about holidays. And classes are just really silly and informal, taking away that stress response. As soon as it's stressful, we've lost them. All right, so it's super important to keep it as laid back and as fun as possible, which as a parent can be kind of hard. I understand that, but keeping the stress away should be the number one priority over regurgitating the material. And even more than that, there's really no reason to shove any sort of academic material down a child's throat because kids are not against learning. They're against being stressed out or bored. But sadly, us as adults, we've assimilated those together as one concept. But no, there's no harm at all in teaching them early literacy. And in fact, the opposite is true. And it continues to hold true for my students, my own children, and every study that I'm following as they're being done. This is where my program, Reading Can Be Puzzling, comes in. This program that I wrote about 3 years ago. It is results-based, meaning that I can guarantee your child will read at a very specific reading level, or they stay in the program with me at no extra cost to you. Therefore, if your kiddo is a complete beginner, I guarantee they'll be reading at a D level, which is essentially equivalent to the first quarter of first grade. They'll be able to blend basically anything together, especially when it comes to like short vowels, CVC words, and stuff like that. And they'll be able to read simple books. They will have context in what they read, what words are, what vowels are versus consonants, and usually about 30, give or take, sight words and high frequency words. This is what I call the beginner program for Reading Can Be Puzzling. Now, if we're talking about maybe an older child and we're looking at someone who was able to do what we just talked about already, they can blend, they know some simple books and stuff. But now we're getting more into the hard stuff that's not so black and white, like digraphs, long vowel sounds and spelling, fluency, punctuation, foreshadowing stories. Then that program is really about solidifying all of the hard stuff so that they can organically and easily move into second grade reading materials where we start to delete pictures and then start to add prefixes and suffixes to the words on top of that. This program is what we would call the advanced program for Reading Can Be Puzzling. For this one, I guarantee that they'll be reading at about an F level, which is about the third quarter of first grade, or again, they stay with me for no extra charge. I have a lot of families enroll the entire family with me, so I do offer pretty steep sibling discounts if we're looking at enrolling 2, 3, or even 4 kiddos at the same time. All subsequent enrollments after that first enrollment will all be able to enroll at 50% off whatever the program price is. If this is something you'd be interested in, please use the link below in the description box to book in with me one-to-one. When we have this meeting, we're going to build out a reading roadmap, and then we're going to go over a little bit of scheduling. This is a one-to-one meeting where I will create a specific roadmap for your child given the information that you put into your application. I take everything there and I build out a roadmap before we meet. That way, when we get together, I can be like, okay, here's what I think so far. But on the call, we will also do either an assessment or a trial. You get to choose. So if your child is a complete beginner, let's do a trial lesson. If they are already reading and you want to see where they are versus where maybe they should be, then you should probably pick the assessment. I only have the availability to do about 6 of these meetings per week, so book in fast or else you may have to push the calendar out several weeks or even maybe a month or so. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe. Since this is a relatively new YouTube channel, liking and subscribing shows the algorithm that this was a useful video to you and it will help push it to other parents as well. Next week is episode 1 of a 10-part series called Literacy for Littles that I'm going to be filming. In this series, I'm going to break down the steps to teaching reading. Most parents and even elementary teachers, they actually don't teach phonics correctly, which can actually really hurt your kiddo. This isn't because anyone is dumb or anything, so don't come at me in the comments, but if you were never taught phonics properly, and spoiler alert, if you are a millennial, you probably weren't. If you're raising kids right now, you probably weren't taught properly either when you were little. But then if you didn't learn properly, you can't teach it properly or effectively, and you're going to struggle. Okay, so I'm going to teach you kind of where to start with that and starting with your kiddos. So episode 1, like I said, will be up next week. It is going to be on phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and synthetic phonics. These are the building blocks of reading, and you do really need to understand what they mean and how to break them down for your kiddo, right? Because me getting on with a 3-year-old, if I try to explain those 3 things, it's going to mean absolutely nothing to them. So I'm going to show you what they mean and then explain how to teach it to your kiddo effectively. Also, please let me know your experiences with your child and learning to read in the comments. What is or was the main struggle with your child or your children? Having as much insight as possible into any and all of your struggles really helps me to continue to create free resources to help parents like you figure out the issues and then nip them in the bud as soon as possible. So please comment and explain them below. All right, I'll be able to get back to you and even probably be able to make a video on your specific problems or issues that you're dealing with currently. Again, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're notified when episode 1 is published next week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Take care.